Welcome to This Day in His Story, created by American Heritage Worldwide. A reminder that every day holds something new to learn. Did you know that Noah Webster was 70 years old when he published an American Dictionary of the English Language? Learn that Webster was a teacher who believed America should have its own way of spelling certain words, and that the Bible was so essential to education. He included over 6,000 biblical references. Discover that his spelling book, called The Blue-Backed Speller, helped generations of Americans to read. Learn that he said, as an independent nation, our honor requires us to have a system of our own, in language as well as government.
If you open up a new tab on your phone right now to search for the spelling of the word color, or just quickly look up a definition so you don't use a word incorrectly in an email, you are looking at the direct, tangible result of a 200-year-old political rebellion.
Yeah, which is kind of crazy to think about.
Right, because we tend to view language as this collective accident, something that just evolves passively, like the weather, shaped over centuries by millions of invisible hands.
Mm-hmm.
But the way Americans spell, speak, and honestly, the way Americans conceptualize their entire national identity, it didn't just naturally drift across the Atlantic Ocean.
No, not at all.
It was meticulously and almost obsessively engineered by one deeply in-debt 70-year-old man working out of his house in New Haven, Connecticut.
Yeah, Noah Webster. It is just this remarkable story of sheer will that honestly subverts everything we think we know about how cultures are built.
Totally.
I mean, if you look at the year his absolute masterpiece was published, it was 1828. And at that time, the United States was this fragile, highly experimental country.
Very fragile.
Right. The population was roughly 13 million people, mostly scattered across this vast, heavily forested, disconnected frontier.
Wow, just 13 million.
Exactly. But looking at that relatively small, vulnerable population, the author of this dictionary prophetically declared that American English would eventually be, and I quote, spoken by more people than all the other dialects of the language.
Which is an unimaginably bold claim to make. I mean, he's staring across the ocean at the absolute height of the global British Empire, and he's basically saying, yeah, we're going to overtake you.
Yeah, the confidence is staggering.
So our mission for this deep dive into today's sources is to uncover the actual mechanics of how Noah Webster literally designed the American English language from the ground up.
Yes.
We're going to look at his iconic 1828 dictionary, the underlying psychological warfare, really, of his spelling changes, and the massive house mortgaging personal sacrifices he made to pull it all off.
It's a wild ride.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand how one single person shapes the communication of millions of people, we have to look at the immediate aftermath of the Revolutionary War.
Right, because the physical battles were over, but the cultural friction was at an all-time high. And you have to realize Webster didn't start out as a famous lexicographer or some elite dictionary writer. He started out as a frustrated school teacher.
A school teacher.
Yeah. He had attended Yale University and later helped found Amherst College, so education was really his central focus. But early in his teaching career, he just hits this wall.
Because of the books.
Exactly. His students, who are the first generation of kids in a newly independent America, were still being forced to learn from textbooks imported directly from England.
Right. Books that still glorified the British monarchy, the British aristocracy, and just, British ways of life.
Which completely undermines the whole concept of a new republic.
Exactly. It makes no sense. He wanted America to have its own books to shape its own youth. So in 1783, he publishes something called the Elementary Spelling Book.
Which later became universally known as the Blue-Backed Speller, right?
Right, because it was literally bound in this cheap blue paper. And looking at the sheer volume of its success and the sources we have, it basically earned him the title Schoolmaster of the Republic.
Yeah, that little blue book was the wedge that really started the split. I mean, it taught generations of American children how to read and pronounce words in a unified, distinctly American way.
It's like a tech startup deciding to build an entirely new proprietary operating system from scratch, just so they don't have to rely on their old competitors' software.
That is a perfect way to put it.
He didn't want the youth running on a British OS. In fact, he explicitly stated, and I quote, "As an independent nation, our honor requires us to have a system of our own, in language as well as government."
What's fascinating here is that Webster understood the socioeconomic power of spelling.
What do you mean by that?
While British English at the time was heavily cluttered with silent letters and complex rules left over from French and Latin influences.
Right, all those extra U's and M's.
Exactly, and that complexity actually acted as a social gatekeeper. It meant you needed expensive elite tutoring to learn how to spell correctly.
Oh, wow. Never thought about it like that.
Yeah, so by simplifying the spelling to be more phonetic, Webster was essentially democratizing reading. He was making it accessible for the poor, rural, frontier Americans who, obviously didn't have access to high society tutors.
That is brilliant. He saw that language is the ultimate invisible glue of national unity.
Totally. I mean, think about it. How do you take 13 disparate colonies places with vastly different climates, economies, religious backgrounds, daily concerns, and make them feel like one single cohesive nation?
You ensure they communicate on the exact same wavelength.
Precisely. A distinct, regular, and pure language was the key to giving America an identity permanently severed from British psychological rule.
But, standardizing how school children spell cat and dog in a little spelling workbook wasn't enough to unify the complex political and philosophical thought of an adult voting populace.
No, you need something bigger for that.
Right. To do that, he had to rewrite the master code of the language itself, which brings us to 1806.
The beta test.
Exactly, the beta test. He publishes a compendious dictionary of the English language, and this is where he actively starts modifying the source code of British English to aggressively Americanize it.
Yeah, this is where we get the deliberate, permanent divergence between American and British English. He intentionally implemented spelling changes to make words logical rather than historical. So he looked at the British C-E-N-T-R-E and just flipped it to C-E-N-T-E-R.
Right.
He looked at a word like honor spelled with a U in England and just excised the U completely, giving us H-O-N-O-R.
And program, right.
Yeah, the word program with the extra superfluous M-E at the end, he just sliced that right off to give us program.
It's crazy because we type these words every single day, completely unaware that we are participating in a 200-year-old deliberate simplification strategy.
We just take it for granted.
But, and I love this part, not all of his updates stuck. The sources list his failed spelling updates, and they raise a massive question about the limits of social engineering.
Oh, the failed ones are the best.
They are, because he wanted the word tongue, T-O-N-G-U-E, to be spelled T-U-N-G.
Just tongue.
Just tongue. And he proposed leather as L-E-T-H-E-R, dropping the A, and feather as F-E-T-H-E-R.
Right.
And honestly, looking at these, feather and tongue make so much more phonetic sense than the way we spell them now.
They really do.
If the goal was democratization and logic, why did American society readily accept taking the U out of honor, but completely refuse to spell tongue with a U-N-G?
Well, it really highlights the organic, deeply stubborn nature of human behavior, because Webster aimed for a perfectly regular, consistent, and pure linguistic architecture. But human language doesn't bend entirely to strict logic.
Right.
A spelling often becomes so deeply ingrained in the visual memory of a culture that a perfectly logical change just looks viscerally wrong on the page.
Like it just feels broken.
Yeah. Exactly. People likely rejected tongue because it looked jarring and primitive to the eye, even if it sounded perfectly accurate to the ear. It proves that while you can guide the river of language, you cannot force it to flow in a perfectly straight geometric line.
It's less like pushing a mandatory software update and more like laying down physical railroad tracks. Like people will use the tracks if they go where they already want to travel, but they'll ignore the ones that feel too disruptive.
That's a great analogy.
But tweaking a few spellings in an 1806 beta test wasn't going to permanently secure America's linguistic infrastructure.
No, it was just the start.
He needed a comprehensive, undeniable masterwork. And this initiates an almost unbelievable 20-year period of isolation and obsession.
Yeah, for nearly 2 decades after that 1806 test run, he basically just sat at a semicircular desk in his home in New Haven, manually expanding, defining, and tracing the etymology of the entire American vocabulary.
Just sitting there for 20 years.
20 years. And the physical toll of this endeavor is just hard to overstate. There were no typewriters, no research assistants, no digital databases.
Just a guy in his desk.
Just a man surrounded by mountains of paper. And get this, he eventually learned 26 different languages.
Wait, 26?
Yes, including Anglo-Saxon, Greek, Hebrew, and Arabic.
That is just absurd.
He did it just so he could trace the absolute purest roots of the words he was defining.
And finally, on April 14th, 1828, at 70 years old, he publishes the absolute behemoth, an American dictionary of the English language.
His life's work.
It contained a staggering 70,000 entries divided across 2 massive volumes. To sit down and manually define 70,000 concepts is a staggering feat of human endurance.
Truly.
So, after 20 years of work, he releases this 70,000-word masterpiece. I mean, it must have been an instant bestseller, right? We assume a masterwork that defines a nation would be an instant lucrative triumph.
You would think so, but it was an absolute financial disaster in the short term. Oh, yeah. The production costs of a 2-volume, 70,000-word set in 1828 were astronomical. The first set originally sold for $20.
Which is a lot of money back then.
It was an exorbitant sum for the average American family at the time. It was so prohibitively expensive that Webster was forced to slash the price to $15 just to move the initial printing run.
How many copies was that?
A mere 2,500 copies.
Wow. A 20-year investment to sell 2,500 copies. That is bleak.
It is. It's a profound tragedy of dedication, really. The financial reward was just non-existent.
So what did he do?
Well, to fund the development of the second edition, which he felt was absolutely necessary to complete his ultimate vision, Webster was forced to mortgage his home.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. The man known as the Schoolmaster of the Republic remained deeply, inescapably in debt for the remainder of his life.
Mortgaging your house at over 70 years old to fund a dictionary. That requires a level of conviction that goes way beyond patriotism or wanting kids to spell center correctly.
Definitely.
If this endeavor ruined him financially and consumed 2 decades of exhaustingly tedious labor, the fundamental question is, why? What was the actual fuel keeping him at that desk?
The sources are actually unequivocal about his motivation. It was his deeply held Christian faith.
Really? Faith drove the dictionary?
Yeah, this wasn't merely an educational pursuit or a linguistic exercise. It was fundamentally a spiritual mission. Noah Webster was a faithful Christian who firmly believed and stated plainly that education is useless without the Bible.
So the dictionary wasn't just a clinical list of phonetic spellings. It was a moral compass designed to shape the American mind.
Precisely. If you examine the text of the 1828 dictionary, he embedded over 6,000 direct biblical references into the definitions.
6,000.
Yeah. He wasn't just telling the reader what a word meant functionally. He was instructing them on how that concept fit into a strict biblical worldview.
And the sources highlight incredibly specific examples of this that show just how radical his approach was compared to how we view dictionaries today. Like fundamental words like marriage, education, sin, law, faith, and prayer. They weren't given sterile, objective definition.
No, they were very intentional.
The definition for pray is a perfect example. In a modern dictionary, you find something transactional, like to ask for something earnestly.
Right, very straightforward.
But Webster includes the basic mechanics he writes, to supplicate, to entreat, to urge. But then he explicitly uses the New Testament to anchor the ultimate meaning of the concept. He cites Acts 8.22, directly quoting, "Repent therefore of this thy wickedness, and pray God, if perhaps the thought of thine heart may be forgiven thee."
Wow.
He is actively preaching a sermon inside the architectural framework of the language.
Yeah, and if we connect this to the bigger picture, it reveals his true methodology and his deepest fear for the young republic.
His fear.
Yes. There is a specific vital quote from Webster's preface that really unlocks his entire 20-year obsession. He wrote, "Language is an expression of ideas, and if the people of one country cannot preserve an identity of ideas, they cannot retain an identity of language."
Identity of ideas. That phrase carries so much weight when you think about a fragile nation trying to hold itself together.
Exactly, because he understood a profound sociological truth. Whoever defines the words defines the reality.
Wow.
If a merchant in New York and a farmer in Georgia have fundamentally different definitions of the words liberty, law, or sin, the Republic cannot physically survive the friction.
They wouldn't even be having the same conversation.
Right. The 1828 dictionary was a deliberate blueprint to lock in America's moral and cultural ideas. He believed that by getting the entire nation to operate on the exact same philosophical and biblical definitions, he could insulate the country from fracturing.
Which leads to the obvious follow-up. Did it actually work? Did imposing this rigid biblical framework onto the language of a rapidly expanding country succeed in unifying them?
It did.
Looking at the historical impact detailed in the sources, the answer is an undeniable yes. He did exactly what he set out to do. He provided a uniformity and a purity of language that acted as the operating infrastructure for an incredible flourishing of civil society.
Yes, because everyone from the elite coastal cities to the furthest western frontiers was utilizing his spelling books and his dictionary. A massive boom in communication occurred.
Right. Newspapers, reading clubs, lecture circuits, and debate societies thrived all across the country.
Hmm.
They could only do that because they finally had a shared baseline of truth and meaning.
It's an infrastructural legacy that outlasted him by centuries, and the amazing thing is he never stopped maintaining that system.
Really, even after it was public.
Even after. Noah Webster died on May 28, 1843. Right up until his final days, he was at his desk.
Still working on it?
Still working. He passed away just a few days after finishing the meticulous revision of an appendix to the second edition of his dictionary.
That is dedication.
He worked on this mission until his final breaths. His life's work didn't just tweak the way Americans spelled it, brought a new awareness and respect for educating the populace, leaving behind an infrastructure of information, knowledge, and wisdom that permanently stabilized a developing nation.
It really fundamentally changes how you view the mundane act of typing an email or looking up a definition. The sheer force of will required to single-handedly shape how hundreds of millions of people communicate today is staggering.
It absolutely is.
Which leads me to a final thought experiment I want to leave you, the listener, with today.
Oh, I like these.
Next time you pull out your phone to look up a word, think about how much its current definition implicitly shapes your worldview. In fact, I challenge you to try this. Find a digital copy of Webster's original 1828 dictionary online. It is widely available in the public domain.
It's very easy to find.
Pick a few fundamental, heavy words. Look up education, look up law, or look up freedom. Compare Webster's deeply rooted, unchanging 1828 definitions to the fluid way we use those exact same words today.
That's a great exercise.
It really makes you wonder, have we lost that identity of ideas that Noah Webster mortgaged his house to protect? It's definitely something to chew on.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the things we take for granted, keep learning, and keep sharing that new knowledge. We'll catch you next time.
Thank you for joining us for this day in his story. May the lessons of yesterday inspire you to see God's hand today and to play your part in his story now. For more faith-based learning, visit ahsworldwide.org, the homeschool for faith and family.